The truth is inside of us, and it's wonderful when we have the courage to tell it.
Welcome to this first of 5 messages that will encompass the nuances of how we use money. We all have the necessity of this colorful paper. No matter the country, no matter the society, money is important for all intents and purposes. Now, having money, whether it's $1 or $1 billion, isn't the focus here, because I am not going to be talking about prosperity riches or manifesting large sums of money to gain popularity. The focal point for this subject is for you to understand the use of money rather than the money making a use of you. It is none of my business or anyone else's business to tell you how to manage your finances or what method is best for you to earn income. You may go to a certified professional advisor, but even then, they are only advising you for a more favorable outcome at an expense, and you are making the decision to involve such persons. Let me tell you a story that will provide you with 7 valuable lessons. There was a father in mature age who had 2 adult sons, and he loved them both incredibly. He was an honorable man and was respected by his dear woman, as well as the admiration of his community. He was a great man of business, but with humility and fair practices, he had gained financial abundance. Being a prudent man, he created a fund for the 2 sons and their effects, so that when he died, whether of natural causes or in an unfortunate early death, the 2 segregated funds will be assorted accordingly. I think that's something to consider if you have dependents, such as those who count on you for sustaining a comfortable life in your unforeseen absence. It's more about making sure that the financial security is well established. Who wouldn't want to have a pile of reserves readily available? This is why 401k and life insurance policies were invented, in order to give the general employee an opportunity to live well in retirement years. Nowadays, it's quite limiting to fully retire from anything, since odds are 95 to 1 that we are projected to work until we're 77 to 80 years old. Albeit the youngest son approached his father and he said to him, "Father, give me the money that is my portion that you have already set aside. I want it now." The father had equity that accumulated substantially on his real estate, but without delay he divided the money of his 2 sons and then gave the requested money to the one asking. No sooner than the rising of the sun on the next day, the son gathered all of his belongings, packed up his finest clothing, and left town. You can imagine how excited and eager he was. He traveled the world and afforded himself many luxuries in towns and cities he visited. He was submerged in the illusion of power, control, and dictatorship due to the immense amount of money he had at his disposal. Throughout the course of his journeys, he tallied up resources on merchandise, prostitutes, fancy hotel stays with various women, gambling events, and wild eating. After going to sleep from partying and drinking, he woke up and he thought to himself, "Let me stay for one more day." But since he didn't keep track or was intelligent with his spending, he realized that all his money was depleted. He began to panic and experience denial. He reasoned that perhaps he was robbed, or maybe he placed the remaining cash in an account for later. Well, he didn't. This immaturity and lack of self-control led him to dire need. All of those people he partied with and supported him in his erroneous habits were nowhere to be found. They were his friends as long as he was able to afford their lavish desires. There's a lesson to note. Be aware of those who are only around you because of the amount of income you earn or the wealth you have managed to accumulate. A noble king in 1800 BCE said, "Wise people live in wealth and luxury, but stupid people spend their money as fast as they get it." This man had no choice but to panhandle for survival. After a while, he noticed a nearby farmer and offered himself for free services. So the farmer told the man to go tend to his pigs in the field. He went and did as he was instructed in the hopes that he would be fed. He hadn't eaten in days, and he was in starvation mode to the point of consuming the food in the pigs' pods. This was his intent, but no one would give him anything. Then the idea came to him, and he reasoned for a moment, then said, What am I doing? My father's servants have food to eat, but yet here I am starving. I will go back to my father's house and tell him, 'Father, I have done wrong to you, and I am not worthy of being called your son. Treat me like one of your servants.' He got up from the farmer's field and proceeded to journey back to his father's estate. After managing the daunting task of traveling back, he came within 4 miles of his father's house. His father was outside and noticed a man walking from the distance. He looked twice before he realized it was his son. It has been months since he has last seen his son, but with compassion and joy, the father ran to the son to embrace and kiss him. Right after that, he told the servants to bring him some fine clothing and shoes for him to exchange out of the raggedy wardrobe he was wearing. The father told the servants to make the finest meal because that evening they were going to celebrate, and they did what he said, and so it was. A celebration had commenced. If you're still paying attention, you remember that there were 2 sons. The oldest son was in the field when all of this was happening, and when he was walking back to the house, he heard music and cheerfulness. He asked one of the servants at one of the entrances, "What's going on here?" The servant replied, "Your brother is back, and your father is celebrating his return. He also told us to cook the best meal for this occasion." Once the oldest son was aware of everything, he became greatly angered and refused to join the festivities. The father came out to the entrance after the servant relayed the reaction, and he pleaded with his firstborn for a while until he intervened and said, "Father, look, every year I have dedicated myself to your counsel and tutelage. I have served you well and never was disgruntled or disobedient of your rules. Yet, you've never given me the finest meal so that I may celebrate with my own friends. This son of yours comes back from misspending his share of the wealth with prostitutes, and you decide to make a great feast for him." The father let the son get his frustrations out, rightfully so, and when he was finished, the patient father said, "Son, you have never left my side, and I am grateful. Everything that I possess is yours. This brother of yours, I celebrated with food and gladness because he was once dead, but he is still alive. He was once lost, and now he is found." Let me tell you the lessons about money in this. 1. Don't be so quick to spend your money on frivolous things in order to appease someone. 85% odds that the person truly doesn't care. 2. The amount of money you have will increase the gravitation of pretenders and backstabbers towards you, so don't flaunt your worth. 3. Money brings out the true essence of an individual. Give a hedonistic person plenty, he will increase in his greedy passions. Treasure in the hands of an altruistic person will help another person reach the treasure of their own. 4. Losing a lot of your wealth, whether caused by you or not, is horrible. But unlike your life, money can be recouped, and as for your life, it cannot. 5. Jealousy will emerge when you are celebrated by those who genuinely care about you, but don't be bothered by that because it has nothing to do with you. 6. No one cares about your background or where you come from, so don't expect handouts. And 7. Humility is a great asset, and it helps you with having a healthy relationship with people and money. Money can and will solve many issues. It depends on what type of issues you consider investing, because a poor man can be rich, and a rich man can be poor. We all have a reservation with death, and you cannot bring anything materialistic or tangible. Therefore, the unfathomed question is, how do you want your first impressions to be? Why do we need money? We need it for everything, and it's integrated with the way we can afford to live, or the 10% of the population who can choose to live a frugal life by choice. The need for money has always been based on bargaining agreements, exchanging one thing for another with mutual benefit. There isn't a civilization in this world that doesn't have a system of interchangeability. Barter was discovered as early as the first generation of humans, even if they didn't know that they were behaving in this manner. But during the Stone Age, they made transactions without currency because it wasn't in existence. They made mutual exchanges that were advantageous for both parties. This prehistoric system has developed into what is now known as supply and demand. Throughout the centuries, as we began to grow as a civilization, many businesses were created. Those who created them were the risk takers, and oftenly they had a personality that seemed antisocial, but they weren't. They were just extremely laser focused on the succession of their goal. They invested their resources into marvelous ideas that we are living in today. Remember, your thoughts are accompanied by your faith, and if you pursue them with hope, it will become evident. The people I'm talking about that do such things are what we call today entrepreneurs. Every company, every organization, and subsidiary was once a grandiose idea from someone. It's good for the economy to have such people, and they are in every generation. That's why we have advanced in technology, industrial manufacturing, semiconductors, and engineering. Money affords us to have proper housing and privacy. If you're not careful of how you select your residence, then you may jeopardize such privacy. Nevertheless, having the accessibility to rent or buy is a luxury in itself, if you didn't notice. In most countries, there are home builders who develop these establishments to the proper code to be approved for habitational living. We all need to remain properly nourished. Food products help us in this regard, but without the adequate funds, this will be hard to achieve. Nowadays, you have a plethora of restaurant options to quench your hunger. It's pleasant to have several selections, but just like a person who lives for riches, it's the same for a person who is desirous of food. Both are gluttonous. My suggestion is to buy what is sufficient for you and your household, and refrain from overindulging in produce. Having clothing is quite necessary to cover your body appropriately, and you should want to dress yourself well. With the extensive amount of thrift stores and clearance sections at your local mall or shopping plaza, you can purchase a suitable wardrobe. Money will solve that issue of nakedness and hygiene. Going places and visiting new attractions will require a departure of some presidential faces. It cannot be done if your financial health is poor. Best practice is to have a balance. But the one thing you must always understand is that your expenses should never exceed your income or liquid cash, unless you want to voluntarily be on the street. This is not insinuating that homelessness is a result of lack of financial literacy, because most times that's a circumstance outside of their control. But what it's stating is that you should be wise with your capital. Another category of money is something called debt. There is positive debt and negative debt. It's important to understand the differences between the two. Positive debt is useful and can be a substitute for money in some circumstances. It incentivizes purchasing power and increases your acquisition potential from creditors. Anything that will help increase your net worth or assist you in emergencies. This is your credit cards, collision, medical insurance, student and mortgage loans. Negative debt is personal loans, auto, payday loans, and loan sharks. If you want any chance of having a healthy financial record, stay away from loan shark organizations. Although we need transportation to get to our destinations for work, which our income is dependent on, or leisure for the majority, it's a liability just like owning a home for 15 to 30 years under a lien. If you incur too much negative debt, you will impact your solvency by failing to make the payment on time, despite having a grace period in some cases. This will include bills, because these are recurring expenses that are needed for a healthy living environment. If you are an adult without any impedances, yet having a hard time with these things, then I would strongly advise seeking financial counsel before you are too far gone. During the Iron Age, when writing systems became more sufficient, an Israeli king wrote, "A wise man will hear, and will increase learning, and a man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsels." There is a reason why they say, knowledge is power. Just look at how applicable that statement is and was. That statement can be effectively considered in the present day. Do you have medical expenditures? How much medication is in your drawer near your nightstand or bathroom cabinet? To give you an idea of the pattern of growth, the CDC, who tracks the country's medicinal output and input, has recorded data from 7 years ago that 46% of the United States population has at least one prescription drug within the past 30 days. In 2018, there were 70% physician visits, and 3 years ago, there were 87% emergency visits. We live in a country that offers tremendous support to individuals in the form of health insurance to cover the large load of expenses that would otherwise make it nearly impossible to afford. Remember what I mentioned about positive and negative debt? Well, this can fall in either category based on how well you manage your health. Eating more responsibly will alleviate 70% of illnesses or health deficiencies outside of those that are anomalies. As a matter of fact, Jesus said, "Be careful not to let yourselves become occupied with too much food and drink, and with the worries of this life, or that day may suddenly catch you." Now, this was pertaining to his second coming, but it's appropriate all the same, and sure enough, many have already been caught with the need of professional medical care due to obesity or premature organ failures. First thing first, do you have a job, career, or some form of an occupation? If so, good. Continue in that field, unless you want to move up in that line of work, or laterally. Doesn't matter if it's behind the desk, home office, delivery services, or contemporary taxis like Uber or Lyft. It's a job, and a job offers you wages that you can utilize for your needs, if you are just starting off, or for other means, if this is a secondary source of income. You cannot learn about the flow of money and the process of earning it if you do not engage in employment. Never think that the work you do is unimportant, because it is. The shared mantra in this society is that if you are not happy at a place, you should leave it and find a new path and desired work. But the problem with that is, it's not the work that's truly making you unhappy. It's actually you. The percentage of unsatisfied and unqualified personnel resigning is 24% based on the U.S. workforce data. People are likely to remain employed at their current positions rather than leaving. The environment of the workspace and people may be different, but the same structures, holiday benefits, lunch breaks, affirmative actions, and gossip will remain. Back in the Great Depression of the 1930s, industries like manufacturing, radioactive coalers, metalliferous mining, public utilities, railroad, retail, and wholesale were desperately needed to rehabilitate the infrastructure that plummeted due to the residual effects of the war and the stock market crash. All of these jobs were labor-intensive, therefore disqualified all women. This is why it's true and not misogynistic to say, men have built the world. These were the days when men were relatively more respected by women, and women submitted to their lover. They also opted to remain in their homes to teach and cater to the children. The rate of men going to apply for work with no prior skills necessary in order to feed themselves and household were 98%. These men didn't care about the workplace environment or how comfortable they would be in that line of work. It was a job, despite how they felt about it. Since men are naturally logical-minded, they intuitively knew that they would be aiding in the recuperation of the country's degradation. They showed up to work and made a living, putting their hands to the plow. Do you know how much money these men were making? By the urgency to have shelter and on the borderline of famine on the horizon, these people were getting paid every 5 days, which is what we know as weekly pay periods. At the end of the week, by the industry, these men were earning $28.50 on average. However, the wage dropped 15% to $24.25 by 1932. But if anyone provides not for his own, and especially those of his own house, he has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. This was from the mouth of a young adult man who wrote an instructional book on purposeful living by serving others as you grow in wealth. But no one took him seriously, or his book, but a few. Yet, he was still rich. There were 3 men back in the 1st century who traveled to Thessaloniki, Greece, which is still an active city today. They were advocating for enriching the community. They were very well known throughout Europe, and the people were ready to give them whatever they wanted. They were like the first celebrities with groupies from all the attention they were receiving. But they turned down the kind gifts with respect and continued to deploy their task alongside the others. They all were working together with the people, creating bonds and genuine relationships as they went on developing low estate towns and villages. Upon leaving, after being there for a moderate time, One of the men said this, "While we were with you, we gave you the order. Whoever doesn't want to work shouldn't be allowed to eat." I agree with that. Any able-bodied person with all of their right mind with no disability can and should work for their share. So it's right. If a person doesn't want to work voluntarily, then there shouldn't be any food allowed to enter their belly. The purpose of employment is for you and the company you work for, not to be idle or lazy, although the 90th percentile is lazy. Don't be fooled by society today trying to be a businessman without understanding the nuances of business etiquette. How can you start a corporation without being involved or associated in one? You cannot. You need the blueprint to form your own plans of enterprising. Otherwise, you have already failed before even starting. Has it ever crossed your mind to think about why you see so many similar companies? Well, if the blueprint has been laid, then you have no need to invent something new, but only recreate better. McDonald's has been the leading burger franchise for years until Burger King and Wendy's came out with their own enticing versions. It's really about living within your means and making rational judgments with your money in order to resolve certain things that can take more priority over another. How is your relationship with money? Have you considered a question like that? It's a good one, isn't it? You may think, how can you have a relationship with dollar bills? Or, that doesn't even make sense. Only people form relationships. Let me tell you, there are people who have developed an uncommon love for money. It's similar to having a strange attachment to your car, pet, or stuffed animal. Throughout the world, there's unhealthy attachments that people have managed to create for themselves. It's a psychological disposition, and most will continue to live their lives in that pattern. It's like seeing a child playing with an imaginary friend, but in adulthood. It's creepy, to be honest, but it's a construction of worship. We worship past pictures that we favored, clothing brands, celebrities, and simple things like getting a fresh detailing on your vehicle because you have subconsciously programmed yourself to making something abstract with no life or breath real by dedicating a specific name to it. People say that they don't believe in God, but all the while, they have made other things their God. Money is a god to a great amount of the population, and it's more worshipped than anything else. People have stripped themselves of all respect to gain it. Families are broken into pieces because of it. The greed and the discontent eats away at certain people. Then there are others who treat it as brittle leaves in a fall, trying to rack them up in a bundle for safekeeping. Robbing and killing usually has something to do with not being able to afford what's desired. If there were no such thing as poverty, and everyone could afford anything they want, it wouldn't make sense to rob or steal. On the contrary, there would be little to no motive to do so. Take 2 starving dogs and give them each their own bowl of food, they will eat contentedly. But if you give those same dogs one bowl, they will exhibit aggression towards one another for that meal. The book of James said, "You want things, but you cannot have them, so you are ready to kill. You strongly desire things, but you cannot get them, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have what you want because you do not ask God for it. And when you ask, you do not receive it because your motives are bad. You ask for things to use for your own pleasures." God doesn't need money or anything from us in terms of materials. We cannot buy our way into heaven. There's only one way in, and many ways that will keep a person out. The only requirement that we need to obtain salvation is to believe in the Son and count Him as our Savior. Simple as that. It's not complex, nor is it a strategic plot. It's clear and concise. Just believe, and by your belief, you will begin to act more pleasing to God and all men. There's great deception in this world, and with the love of money being the root to all evil, it's quite expedient how religious entities have used elegant wordplay to trick people into giving them money. It's hypnosis, and it mesmerizes the minds of many in believing that they are surely promised to receive a blessing soon, all the while not understanding that Satan has great power to manifest your blessing. Giving 10% is bribery, witchcraft at best, and the leaders in these religious organizations have blinded themselves alongside others. In the previous episode, I mentioned how the government recognized the profit potential as well as religious elders from the rise of marriages. Well, don't be naive. This giving money in the church by offering is one of the many schemes of the mystic illusion. It's the blind leading the blind, essentially. If this tithing thing was so important and would be a spiritual crime, then why didn't Jesus preach about it? He was certainly alive long enough to have the opportunity to do so, being that he was approximately 33 years of age. Didn't he have 12 men with him? Yet none of them offered 10% to Jesus in any way. So, who's lying here? People or God? That's what happens when you are telling people what they like to hear instead of what they need to hear. Tithing means 1/10, 10% in layman's terms. It was a custom directly commanded by God to the chosen 12 nations to give 1/10 of their first fruits in honor of the Lord's mercy and grace on them. It was God's method to instill humility within them and also teach them to practice giving so that the priests or foreigners who travel with them would be nourished as well. By the way, it wasn't money they were offering, it was cattle. If you are going to truly practice this custom in its original form, then shouldn't there be sacrifices of animals at some point? Jesus is our 10th, and he is also Lord over the Sabbath, which is Saturday for those who are unaware. Then that means these ancient traditions have been done away, null and void. So, if God doesn't need 10% or offerings anymore, then I want to ask, who are you really giving your hard-earned cash to? Paul was a tent maker, and he was working to provide shelter for others and taking the money he earned as income to apply it to the ministry. He worked for the money, not scamming people for 10%. He wrote the bulk of the New Testament. Not once did he preach about this topic, but what he did say is this: what pay do I get then? It is the privilege of preaching the good news without charging for it, without claiming my rights and my work for the gospel. This is why the good book states, those of you who try to earn God's approval by obeying his laws have been cut off from Christ. You have fallen out of God's favor. This means that if you are following the 10 Commandments of Moses and other Old Testament laws, you are in bondage and cutting yourself apart from Christ. Jesus told us that we can fulfill all the 600 plus laws with just 2 new laws. Number 1, love God with all of your heart, with all of your mind, and with all of your soul. And 2, show love to your neighbor as you would want your neighbor to show love to you. The physician by the name of Luke made it plain when he said, no servant can be the slave of 2 masters. Such a slave will hate one and love the other, or will be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. The United States of America is one of the most lucrative and richest countries in the world. It hosts the most millionaires and billionaires in history. Whoever thought 30 years ago that this would be possible? That just tells you that there's more ways to obtain financial freedom than a cat who has a limit of 9 lives. Money solves many issues. To have adequate income to reduce or eliminate certain liabilities and expenses, because we all have monthly obligations to some union. We all should think about how grateful we are to have such valuable services. It would be staggeringly challenging to remain affluent in business affairs or organizational relations if there were a discontinuance of cellular services and internet, since it's consequential. Without it, networking efficiently could jeopardize the revenue of our economy. I think the best attitude is to cheerfully pay your bills, because you wouldn't have the access to the luxuries afforded to you today if it wasn't for someone risking their own to make a great developmental invention to improve the way we live throughout mankind. Think about the last time you ever received something for free. Perhaps it was a free gift card, a free dinner date, a free package that arrived on your doorstep spontaneously, or a free vehicle that may have been given to you. All of those things that were given freely to you were once purchased by someone else. Everything has a consumer price, whether cheap or expensive. Everything that has true value is free. Our life, our skills, our minds, and the air we breathe. Those are all free. We wouldn't have those immeasurable valuables without someone giving them to us. If it was freely given to us, then who was kind enough to pay the price for us to be endowed with such pleasantries? I'll give you a hint. Step outside and get a good visual towards the sky. The whole purpose of money is for exchanging for benefit, not for usury, as many have dedicated their way of capitalizing. There's a reason why money laundering is a crime. It's filthy. Just imagine taking your clothes to the laundromat just to put them through the rinsing cycle, then take them back after drying has completed to wear them again a few days later. You will contaminate your other clothes and your body. Goods and services are what money is for. Services that render growth in the economy and not solely personally. There's a major difference between the two. Personal capital gains doesn't employ others. It only is one-sided like the pyramid scheme, and there are many out there. Then you have industries like music, sports, actor and actress who get their share of large sums to sell out. If you take the time to think, you can pinpoint other examples like this. What profit is to gain the entire world but lose your own soul? A prostitute makes money and a paralegal makes money. Which two methods do you think add more valuable services? With public services, longevity businesses, both parties reap gain and contribute to the cash flow infrastructure worldwide, consumers and wholesalers. There's a reason why these indices are held by shareholders and long-term investors. Your consumer discretionaries and staples. I'll say this, if it has any weight, don't let wise people brag about their wisdom. Don't let strong people brag about their strength. Don't let rich people brag about their riches. It's all futile and can be gone as quickly as it was gotten. One evening, a well-esteemed oligarch who was a bachelor was scheduled to leave his country to join a board meeting in another land. He had men servants and maid servants for hire, as well as 3 types of chefs to take care of the 3-course meal preparations. He was ready to go. As the chauffeur held the car door open, seeing the man approaching, destined to take him to the private airport, the man turned around and called for 3 of his manservants. They promptly came to him, and with respect, they nodded their heads. The master told them that he was headed out and will be gone for several months. They again nodded their heads with understanding. He called forth the 3 men one by one, but as he did this, he would delegate a task for them to do while he was away. So, the first comes close, and the master says to the servant, "I am going to give you $10,000. Go and make a profit for me, and I will compensate you handsomely." So, he wrote a check for that amount and gave it to him. Then, the second servant comes close, and the master says, "I am going to give you $5,000. Go and make a profit for me, and I will compensate you handsomely." So again he wrote a check for that amount and gave it to the servant. He did the same thing for the third, but only gave him $1,000. When the master returned 4 months later, he got comfortable in his mansion. Then he sent for the 3 servants he gave the money to. Just like before, they came promptly and stood before him with a slight nod of respect, looking attentively. They knew why they were being called, so in the same order as given, the first servant stepped forward and said, "My lord, you have trusted me with 10,000, and yet here I deliver to you 10,000 more." The master replied, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in few things, so I will make you a ruler over many things, and you are no longer a servant, but a ruler." Since he was no longer a servant, the first man stood on the right side of the master. The second servant stepped forward and said, "My lord, you have trusted me with $5,000, and yet here I deliver to you 5,000 more." The master replied, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in a few things, so I will make you a ruler over many things, and you are no longer a servant but a ruler." Well, you can guess it. He did exactly what his fellow mate did, and they both were now standing on the right side of the master. The third servant approached and said, "My lord, you have trusted me with $1,000, and I understood how meticulous you are about your finances. I was afraid and immediately took the money, placed it in an envelope, then put it in a ballistic safe. I thought to myself more and reasoned that it was not safe enough, as I might have thought. So I decided to dig a hole in the field and place the safe in the ground until you came back. When I heard that you would be arriving, I went outside yesterday to dig up the safe and retrieve the money to give back to you in its untampered condition." In discontent, the Lord said, You wicked and lackadaisical servant. You would have been better to just put the money in a bank. That way it would at least collect interest. He pointed at the servant and said, "Go and take the money from him and give it to him who has $10,000. After they did so, the master ordered guards to remove that servant from the premises swiftly. What you need to remember from this story are these key points. 1. To whom much is given, much of him is required. 2. If you cannot take sensible risk, then you will never receive a worthy reward, and what you had will be taken from you and given to a more favored contestant. 3. Being afraid to step out on faith doesn't do you no good. You will only hurt yourself, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. 4. We all have talents and abilities, but if you're not going to seek out how you may utilize them, then you are like a branch in a tree which cannot produce leaves and is broken off to be thrown into the fire. No branch that has broken off has entered God's kingdom. 5. Use money and don't be so attached to it. In closing, all hard work brings a profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. A feast is made for laughter, and wine maketh merry, but money answereth all things. Thank you.
The truth is inside of us, and it's wonderful when we have the courage to tell it.